Now, when we talk about ICP pressure, ICP is a big one. And the thing is, the most likely problem you're going to run across is crank no start, or it'll only start when cold because the oil seems a little thicker. Once the oil gets hot, gets a little thinner, and it's not going to start. That's a very common thing, or you'll just crank no start. Now, when you look at a 2003 6-liter, you're going to see the high pressure pump located in the back of the motor, and you're going to see the plumbing that goes from the pump over to the rail. So what am I going to see different here? Is that these rails are on top of the fuel injector. So you probably have seen them. You remove them to get to the injector itself, but again, it's plumbing that's high pressure oil. So the biggest problem with the 6-liter when it comes to ICP pressure is leaks. And boy, can we have leaks all over the place. We can have leaks at the rails. We can have leaks at the high pressure pump. We can have leaks in the plumbing going all the way up to the rail. When you look at a 2004 and later model, and that means 2004 and later, if it's an Econoline, it went up to 2010. If it's a 6-liter Super Duty, it went up to 2007. But in this case, we see the wavy oil rail. This is the wavy oil rail. So you'll see the high pressure pump still located in the back, but in 2005, we saw a change. We went to a cast iron pump. So this aluminum 7-cylinder pump was only used for 2 years. Then in 2005, they went to the cast iron, which was more stout. If I've done 2 or 3 pumps in the last 8 years, the cast iron type, it's a miracle. And they take a beating. But these were a little bit problematic. They had several issues, but in this case, watch out for it. But all I'm just trying to say is you got to find the leak. Now, given the fact that the ICP sensor, let me zoom this up a little bit, the ICP sensor is located there on the passenger side valve cover. Many guys were pressurizing through here, but you got to watch out, which is not shown here. But one thing you got to watch out for is the IPR valve. Like I showed earlier in the basic diagram, the IPR valve is normally open. So one of the things you need to do and keep in mind is that if you're going to try your do-it-yourself and you've been reading a lot, watching YouTubes, please understand something I don't hear a lot of guys talk about. If you're going to pressure test to find a leak, you got to understand that the IPR must be commanded closed. So there you go. So let me give you a quick trick. I don't have a diagram to show it, but I'll just say it, and then maybe later on I'll show it in part 2. Yellow, red wire. You go to the engine connector, which is the middle connector of the computer next to the driver's side battery, middle connector. Look for it. It's the only yellow with red striped wire. That is your IPR wire there. If you just simply probe it and ground it with key on, don't worry, you're not going to fry anything, not going to hurt anything. You probe it right there. You leave the connector there and you're just going to back probe it and ground it. That will actually ground the IPR. The key is already providing power to the IPR. So the IPR will go, it'll close up. And that's what's going to happen to find a leak. All right. Now, here's a 2003 model like we just showed. There's the cylindrical rail right there. So in this case, that goes on top of the injector. So in order to remove it, you just pop it off. There are bolts there. And I got to tell you, if you're a technician, you're looking at this, please make a note. Make sure that you torque these bolts in, because we find so many that are loose or broken, or there's like 2 or 3 holding it down and that's it. So quit being a butcher. You know, take care of those bolts and torque them appropriately to Ford specifications there. So there you go. All right, so here's a 2004. All 2004 later models look a lot this way. The intake manifolds are U-shaped, while the early 2003s were oval shaped, you know, so the intake manifolds were not the same. So in this case, what do I see right here? Hopefully you can see it with my cursor. There you can see the ICP sensor I was talking about. In order to remove it, you just take a socket, take it out, and there you could pressure test. So no valve cover removal necessary there in order to get to that. So now, another thing that we see very common, and customers get agitated when we do several jobs like injector replacement, we sell them we sell them the glow plug harness, because 80% of the time these glow plug harnesses right here are all ripped up. So you got to know how to pull them up carefully, especially using a pick to get that O-ring loose. A lot of guys use the tool. We do not recommend the Ford tool because it'll rip it. It's like pulling a spark plug boot out of a spark plug. That's what it is in reality. It's not spark plugs, glow plugs, but all I'm saying is like pulling a boot, you got to be very careful how you pull them off. Now, the other thing you got to understand, on both wavy and cylindrical rails. Anytime you remove this rail, whether for injector replacement, cylinder head replacement, you're going to see a plug right here. And that is an Allen head plug. Using an Allen wrench, you can take this plug off. That is to fill the rail. So if you do remove it, you got to fill it up with oils to remove a long crank. So in this case, when we fill the oil rails and we've just done injectors on a job, it fires up rather quickly. If you don't, you're going to sit there forever cranking, cranking, cranking. I mean, cranking forever. So anytime you remove these rails, whether it being the wavy or the cylindrical rail, you take this plug off, and what you do is you fill it up with oil. You can use an oil can, put 15W40, whatever oil, and diesel oil in it, and you could just fill it up, and that will be reduce your start times. Many guys have said, hey, I just did a motor, I just put injectors, I did heads, whatever, and it won't start. Well, it's because you got to start long ass time in order for it to. So to prevent that, take the plug off and add your oil in there, and that'll fill up. So in other words, the pump won't have to work hard to actually fill that oil rail up. Remember, these pumps are not high volume movers. These are pressure generators. That's what they're mostly there for. So watch out for that there. Now, if you backtrack, you can see, actually, let me go forward here. Here you can see the wavy oil rail, and I've zoomed here. You'll notice the wavy oil rail has the plug right there. Now, word of caution on this plug. We had a truck come in with a hard start. It would start sometimes, not start sometimes. Turns out that the leak was not in the plumbing like we typically find. It was actually at the plug. So called Ford, and turns out that Ford had the plug available. So you may want, those of you that are shops, not do-it-yourselfers, you may want to keep a few of these in stock, right? All right, towards the back, you're going to see what we call the standpipe. The standpipe goes under here. You'll see an Allen head, but here you can see another one. This one right here is what we call the dummy plug. Yes, it's called a dummy plug. And my recommendation is anytime you are removing this oil rail, whether it being, a 2004 all the way up to 2007, if it's an Econoline, like I said, 2010, replace the dummy plugs. It has to be a given, because those O-rings, even though they now have a Teflon reinforcement ring, I highly recommend replace them, and use the Ford ones, please, from Ford. Those are the best ones. In this case, if you use aftermarket stuff, don't be surprised they go out within a year. So there's a lot of stress and a lot of pressures going on here. So definitely want to use OE stuff there. So, but anyways, this is your, your standpipe right here. So we'll show you another pic of it here as we move along. Now, a lot of people ask, where's the IPR valve? I'm a novice at this. Well, this is an IPR valve / ICP on a 2003, early 2004 model. We showed you earlier the ICP sensor on the valve cover, right? Well, not on a 2003. On a 2003, early 04, you're going to see the ICP right next to the IPR valve. So that is your IPR valve located on the back of the motor, way in the back, behind the FICM. So in order to access it, we typically remove the FICM in order to get to it. You can get to it. Guys whine and cry. We can get to it with no problem. So you can too as well. So, but here's your ICP. Now, this is important to understand, because we have found many oil leaks come from this ICP sensor, and don't be surprised you put your finger to disconnect it for diagnosis or removal and you break it. Why? Because right above it is exhaust. So since it's all above it, you're going to find that it actually has heat on it. So it isn't surprising for it to be toasted. So if you have a foam insulation over them, put them back there. You want to order it from Ford to protect these guys from the high heat, definitely put them back on over these sensors, please, and actuators. So there's a better view of a 2003, early 2004. Here you can see the IPR valve. Again, this controls the high pressure oil to dump it to the crankcase, and there's your ICP sensor located right there. Again, you can see the insulations I was talking about. Now, this is a rare thing to see, because most trucks that we get, these heat shields are all gone. I would say 90% of the trucks that come in, these heat shields are not even there anymore. Some technician worked on it, never put them back. So more than ever, you may want to use the insulations to put them back to cause problems. So like we said, high pressure is usually caused by numerous issues, mostly leaks. So leaks are common at the pump outlet and the plumbing to the oil rails. So labor issues, in order for me to find a leak, I like to use nitrogen. Some guys like to use shop air going through the ICP hole, or there's an adapter they sell, which I don't have on me right now, but there's an adapter they sell where I can actually put it where the IPR goes. So, But the IPR is very important because if I have a truck that comes in and I'm diagnosing, I'm not building any ICP pressure, but I got oil pressure, right? Make sure you got oil pressure. And I discussed that in another previous video. But in this case, you know you got ICP pressure, right? Excuse me. Let's start over again. The truck comes in, I got an ICP pressure problem. I do have engine oil pressure because remember, if you've seen that YouTube video, I tell you to look at the oil pressure gauge, see if it goes up because the oil pressure switch. I need oil pressure, like we discussed at the beginning. Then you can go to high pressure ICP. So if I'm not building enough ICP pressure to start the engine or for it to run properly, this is the guy we go after next because you want to know if the system is contaminated. So take a look at these two pictures right here. Here you can see the one they just put in, and here's one that that was original. What is missing? Well, there's a screen that's supposed to be there. There's two different designs, but in this case, the screen is gone. Now, it could be inserted in the bore where it screws in, so you may want to take a pick and see if the screen is in there. If not, it's disintegrated, and it's somewhere downstream towards the injectors, right? So if you do have the spring, it isn't surprising, as you can see in this picture, to see metal on the screen. Where's this metal coming from? The high-pressure oil pump is starting to go out. So in this case, that justifies the fact that the high-pressure oil pump, even though it's generating maybe pressure, starting to go out. So therefore, it may need replacement. Now, in order for me to get to this, let's show you. Here's the engine assembled. You know, you could see two key items right here. First of all, right there, let me zoom this in. You're going to see the high pressure, excuse me, start over. We're going to see the oil pressure switch, usually white, single wire connector. Here you can see your engine oil temperature sensor. Now, if you really want to measure oil pressure, this is where you would go into. Okay, and as you can see, we got a straight shot on it with a extension and a socket. I can get to it, get the sensor out. If I have the proper adapter and hose, I can go in there and I could actually measure engine oil pressure while cranking or running if the engine runs. So therefore, you can monitor that. We rarely do, but in this case, if it's need be, we will. And then over here, which is a little bit of a pain, but to get to, that's your oil pressure switch. So like I talked about in the previous YouTube video, it's a switch. Okay, so there you go. All right, so we move on. So we remove the oil filter housing. And by the way, there you can see the switch, and there you can see engine oil temp better, right? And we take it off. And then at that point, we see our oil cooler assembly. So in this case, this is the whole assembly. Now the intake has been removed. So now we got our oil cooler assembly here. There's your tower with your oil bypass, by the way, right there on the top. Now, once you take the cooler off, okay, you're going to see the reservoir right underneath it. So this guy right underneath this oil cooler is your reservoir. What a lot of people don't realize is that that area right there, this whole area where the oil cooler sits in, there's a seal around here, that has oil pressure in it. So that's a pressurized chamber pushing oil towards the high pressure oil pump. Now this has got coolant passages too. So this is oil, this is coolant right here. And we also feed like the EGR oil cooler, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm trying to focus here, here's your reservoir. So that means that every time you change the oil, there's always about almost a quart sitting in here you cannot change. Okay, in case you did not realize. This is not drain. It actually sits here. What pushes it out is oil pressure moving out of there. So as I take the oil cooler out, there we could see the reservoir. We drained the reservoir and we could see the screen. There's your high pressure oil screen. This screen is a joke. Okay, why am I telling you it's a joke? Because this screen right here, okay, this screen is actually filtering the oil. Now, for the longest time, we were replacing these oil screens because they were blown through. So if there's any crap here, any junk here, it's going to actually blow through this hole. So what's in this hole? Well, if I follow this hole right here, you're going to see it goes over to the back. What's this cover right here? Well, this cover is housing the high pressure oil pump, which is in the back of the motor. So here we can see the high pressure oil pump, and here we could see our IPR valve, which bolts to it. Okay, there's our IPR valve right there. So as we look closer, we take the cover off, and there we could see the screen filtering the oil that goes through a passage feeding the high pressure oil pump right there. Okay, so that's what we're looking at right there. So in this case, let me use a marker here so you guys can understand. In this case, we'll use a different color here so we can see that oil goes over to the bottom. So it's bottom feeding the high pressure oil pump. The pump has 7 little cylinders on this model, and it'll actually chuck out the high pressure oil, which goes over to the plumbing here. Now, what sits up here is the IPR valve, so the IPR can open up and dump the oil pressure down to the crankcase right there. Okay, that's what you're looking at. All right, why is this important to understand? Well, because, let me turn off my marker there. So in this case, oops, sorry. We can see here that oil will go straight to the high pressure oil pump. There you go. Now, what is important to note? Because this screen can get clogged up, like I said already. And I would say that 90% of the time of the trucks I've worked on, they were because there was a wet paperish material. You know what it was? Oil filter material. The component that's designed to protect the oil or filter the oil is the cause. That's why you got to be careful with aftermarket oil filters. So don't use them. There you go. So if you're lucky, you might find crap in there. And there was a lot of other manufacturers selling you oil coolers and seals where the seals were actually filling up this chamber. You're going to find that to be an issue too. So there you go. Now there are leak points here. The O-rings right here. Do yourself a favor. If these O-rings are blown or cut, in other words, replace the whole cover and the O-ring because that means it's worn out that bore. So in this case, I've done the O-rings, put it all back together, and guess what? It ripped again within seconds. So don't, if you see an O-ring ripped up here, then therefore you definitely have to replace the high pressure pump cover and the O-ring itself. But high pressure oil travels through here and it goes over to the back, which is again our pipes or our plumbing that goes up to the standpipes. Now to take a better look at that, this pipe right here is a pain in the butt, which is this guy right here. I believe I have a picture of it. By the way, there's a high pressure oil pump. There it is. We call it the branch tube. This guy right here that I'm showing you is this guy right here. Let me backtrack. Is this pipe right here. So this is the hardest part to replace should you have a leak. Thank God it's not a high pressure item, but it can be because we used to see a lot of leaks right here at the STC fitting, but then there was a revised fitting that came out from International and Ford. There was about 3 or 4 updates, but you should be getting the latest and greatest here. But in this case, if the welds, we had one where the weld broke here. In order to replace that, we had to take literally almost a whole motor apart in order to get to it, because here you can see the cylinder head removed where the standpipe goes in here. So there you go. Here's the 2005 and later high pressure pump that I was talking about earlier. This is cast iron. Like I said, I've only replaced a few of these, but they've proven to be very, very stout, very well made. And there you can see the IPR drain tube. That's the drain, not drain tube, but the drain hole that you see there. So that's what we're looking at. But that's the 2004. But we still got the same branch tube coming out of there too. So there you go. There's a branch tube. $110, $120 part, but about 30 some hours of labor to replace, you know. So all right. So as we continue with the 6 layer, there you can see we told you about the dummy plug, and here goes with your standpipe. Now, as I put an Allen wrench just to show you that an Allen wrench needs to be used, Allen head, but when you pull the tube out, this right here is your snubber valve. This is the snubber valve. This is the tube right here, but on top, this is your snubber valve. It's a dampener, if you will. There's a plate inside with a spring. That's what you're going to see. So what it does as the pump is pumping, there's pulsations of oil hydraulic pressure coming in. So what this does, it dampens the pulsations. That's what we're doing. We're damping the pulsations. So when we find the screen missing out of the IPR or junk or pieces of metal, this is where you want to come look. Okay, a lot of it gets stuck here in the snubber valve. So the snubber valve is all fully reusable. You know, we check the O-rings, make sure they're okay. If not, you can replace it. I've never done O-rings only. I usually replace the whole component because it's a tight fit. But in this case, look out for the snubber valve to see if there's any junk. Obviously, if I get to the injectors, I want to look at the inlet of the injector, see if any contamination made it to the injector there.